Oh yeah, yeah. For those that haven't been following, Cruise Foam just won a Time Magazine 2023 Invention of the Year. So it's huge, really big deal for us. So it was great to see a lot of hard work coming to fruition. For those that don't know me, my name is Toby Corey. I see a lot of recognizable faces out there. And I basically am only selling one thing today, and that is to try and explain to you the importance of creativity and why I think it's the currency of the 21st century. Why it's our most important skill, our most important superpower, what it is, both scientifically, how it's developed, and how I think it can benefit humanity as a whole. Um, Before I start that talk, I think I also want to share kind of my top level philosophy, which is underlies why creativity is so important. And in my view, as far as I know, our species is the most advanced, the most powerful species on this planet. With that, in my opinion, comes a deep moral responsibility that we should be basically creating more opportunities for future generations. And unfortunately, I think we're creating more problems for future generations. So that's a longer arc story, but I think creativity underlines all of this. Very quickly, I was, let's see, a successful entrepreneur back in the day at a prior life. Had the opportunity to build the world's largest web development company, take it public. I get to retire early in life and basically got really bored. So it sounds great to be retired, but when you're not doing anything and life's just passing you by without a lot of productivity, I really get to a point where I'd rather be going crazy than sitting at home. So from there, I had the opportunity to spend time at Solar City and Tesla. I went through my second IPO at Solar City. I just finished up an 11-year career teaching entrepreneurship at Stanford University for the last 11 years. I'm excited to be launching a new program at UCSC this spring. More to come on that. And I'm currently the Chief Operating Officer at Cruise Foam. I met the team 6 years ago when they first spun out of UC Santa Cruz as a PhD research project with a very ambitious vision, which is to figure out how to create a material that was biodegradable and compostable that could replace styrofoam, which we know is bad, polyethylene, polypropylene, and all these petroleum materials that sit in landfill for 400 or 500 years. You have microplastics now in your lungs, they're in the air, they're in the atmosphere, contributing to a lot of the major problems of us creating more problems than opportunities for future generations to come. Climate change certainly being at the top of that list. And then I'm a lifelong entrepreneur, so that's another whole story that I'll come back and talk about that. I wanted to start with a really interesting quote because it's going to underlie today's talk on creativity, because part of creativity is a little bit biological. There's another part of creativity that is not biological. And it's this thing called your consciousness, who you really are, what's going on in your head. No one knows where that is. And I think this Lao Tzu quote captures a lot of that ethos, which is if you don't change direction, you may end up where you're going. So I asked ChatGPT, who's my new favorite friend. Doug, of course, introduced me to that dude or woman or person. And I asked it to say, okay, if Lao Tzu were alive today, he existed, I think, 6 BC, famous philosopher, how would he basically interpret this quote? And it went on something like this. The quote reflects a profound philosophical concept related to the idea of mindfulness, intentionality, and the consequences of one's actions. It suggests that people often move through life without a clear sense of purpose or direction, simply going with the flow or following the path of least resistance. In doing so, they may not be fully aware of where they are headed or the outcomes they are likely to encounter. In essence, Lao Tzu is urging individuals to be mindful of their actions and choices, to have clear sense and purpose and direction in life, and to be conscientious of the potential consequences of their decisions. Without such mindfulness, people may unintentionally end up in situations or places they did not intend to be, simply because they did not actively guide their own course. The quote underscores the importance of self-awareness, intentionality, consciousness, decision-making in one's life journey. It encourages individuals to take responsibility for their actions and choices rather than passively going through life. And that's probably my first really important underlying concept, which is too much of society goes with the flow because it's convenient, it's easy. Human beings are supposed to go to college, get married, have kids, do X, Y, and Z, describe things in this certain way. And what happens is that we end up basically following and living what I call a zombie life. And where one of the set points in my life started, so after I'd spent time in tech, was really happy and really thought like, wow, once I reach this financial goal that I'm looking for, then life is going to be great. And it turns out that it really wasn't. And there's more to life than putting yourself in a financial position that you really enjoy. And so I had the opportunity after finishing up this tech career to meet this really interesting dude, Dr. Richard Leakey. He's since passed away. And he was famous for discovering Trachonic, one of the earliest early versions of humanity. And I wrote a book called The Sixth Extinction in the mid-90s. And it's a dense read, but he's chronicled the exact path that we're on, which is like, it's hard to find anybody that would tell you that like, we're not on a path of destruction. Like we have very, very significant issues. The good news is that there's help on the way. But this really like got me thinking about this whole concept of like, are we creating more opportunities or more problems for future generations to come? And what really stood out is that it's really all about creativity that underlies progress and change in the world today. And what Dr. Leakey did in the mid-90s was he became the most second powerful political figure in Kenya. And he used to run Kenya Wildlife Services, KWS. And at the time, one of his big core tenets around the sixth extinction is that we're massively destroying all this biodiversity, which is a harbinger of things to come, aside from all the CO2 that we're pumping into the atmosphere and the shit that we're dumping in the ocean and lakes and streams and everywhere else. But basically, he was losing the war to poachers. And he was the first wildlife services executive in the world to militarize a significant chunk of his 500,000 person group to kill poachers on site. That was the only way that he could stop them. And he had a lot of progress in reducing that destruction of these wild animals and extinction of them. That did cause a lot of people, though, poachers, to try to kill him. So he used to fly everywhere. They sabotaged his plane. Was amputated from the knees down. But I just think that the creativity, like how to solve these really hard challenges, how to really think outside the box, I think bring a warrior spirit that'll solve some of those problems was really epic. And it made a really big mark on me. Since that time, this other interesting dude named Paul Watson, for those that ever watched Whale Wars, where these international fishing boats were destroying whales, getting ready to wipe them out. And Paul Watson used to work for Greenpeace, and he found like those tactics weren't working. So he went to Bob Barker. They commissioned this boat called the Sea Shepherd, and they literally would engage with these illegal fishing boats in international waters, ramming them and really disrupting what they were doing. So of course, that actually also caused some violence. Paul Watson one day was actually wearing a Kevlar vest, took a bullet to the chest. He survived that, but they've had staggering results on reducing that. So that was an important part that shifted me into really about my life's journey. From there, I went on to Solar City and then to Tesla and now at Cruise Foam. And it all starts basically with creativity, which I really believe is the soul of humanity. And we all have it. It manifests itself in very different ways. And I'm going to make a case to you today of how we actually lose that. There's some science around that we're going to go over. There's some other aspects around brainwave activity, kind of the activities that you invest your time and energy in. But this is really all about imagining something that's not there. That's what the heart and soul of creativity. Trying to fix a problem or innovate in some particular way. That's what Elon did at Tesla, right? There was no electric car that ever made any wide scale. His vision was to transform the driving experience. And I do think that we're not too far away from a day when you're not going to buy a product that's bad for the planet. But Elon did make a really important comment that stuck with me going way back. In the early 2000s, this large venture capital firm, Draper Fisher, invested hundreds of millions of dollars on early clean tech investments. Most of them failed. They lost a lot of money in that fund. And I remember talking to Elon about that, and he said, the reason why it failed is that nobody's going to buy inferior products that cost more, right? So like the challenge is it's incumbent on innovators and creators to actually come up with compelling products that consumers and customers and businesses want to buy. And although the Tesla car is electric, some of the early people were very green, but the reason why people buy it today is because they've transformed the driving experience. If anyone hasn't driven one, it really is like an amazing vehicle, in my opinion, better than anything else out there. And setting that standard ahead, getting like the largest supercharging fast network, making that investment, the largest gigafactory, creating lithium-ion batteries. But all this is really possible, and all that underlies creativity. So I also took Doug's advice, and I chat GPT'd how Leonardo da Vinci would think about creativity. And this starts to set up, again, some of that context around everything starts with intellectual curiosity. And if you're not curious about anything, then this talk is not really good talk for you, or anybody that wants to take control of their own life or do something positive in the world or make a change, a career change, or whatever whether it's a nonprofit or whatever they want to do. Everything starts with creativity. I learned this while teaching at Stanford, and I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of colleges and a lot of students. And the number one core ingredient is like just being intellectually curious, wanting to learn more. And then there's another aspect. I'm reading Rick Rubin, who's a world famous music producer, probably arguably the best in the world. He just wrote a book called The Creative Act. It's an amazing read. There's a lot of really good stories and anecdotes that apply to any industry. There's obviously some music bent to it, but really all about this concept of observation, stepping back. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's so important and why some of us spend so much of our time in a brainwave state that is going to promote zero creativity. Interdisciplinary thinking. This is a really important concept. Steve Jobs and Forbes magazine did a review, a study before he died. And they were looking for what's the single most important factor that successful people have adopted, both been happy in life and successful. And it turns out that this one concept called open networks was the largest harbinger of things to come on success. And if you look at the world today, it does the exact opposite. Like if you did an experiment on LinkedIn, like go out and basically call 50 people. If enough of those people click, they don't know you, you're going to get a warning message from LinkedIn telling you don't reach out to people you don't know. The exact opposite should be true. Social media, it develops a social graph. It starts to understand your politics, likes, dislikes, and just feeds you the same shit. So you end up staying in an echo chamber. It's the exact opposite of what you should be doing. And a cardinal rule of creativity is like by meeting new people, reading new things, or go watch a TV show, Fox News or MSNBC, whatever that you like, you're just going to get the same thing. And you're going to stay in the same swim lane. And your creativity is going to erode over time on that. Experimentation. I was talking to Doug and James and Joshua Resnick the other night. Fascinating discussion. That's a whole separate another topic. But one of the things that really struck me was talking about like creativity as I was talking about some of these concepts. And he said, well, a lot of people have fear of failure. And I hate to fail. I'm a type A person. Like that's what drives me every day of not wanting to fail. But I've had I've had more failures than successes. You read my resume or LinkedIn, it looks like I'm the most perfect guy. I'm the exact opposite of that. I've had way, way more failures than successes. I'm far from being a perfect human being. But I'm willing to experiment and put myself out there and try new things. Some will work, some won't. And I'm growing and I'm developing in that. And so finding a way where we can encourage a society where failure is not a failure. It's a learning opportunity, right? It's really how you utilize that, almost like a bit of jujitsu. Experimentation, associative thinking. I'll get to more of this vision. And then, so the bottom line is that the reason this chart's here, another really important aspect of creativity on the biological side is that the more data points you have in your sphere of consciousness is the more creativity you're going to have, right? It's as simple as that. So if you're getting very few data points in, you're basically not learning, you're not reading, you're not developing, you're not meeting new people, on and on and on, then you're basically going to have very few data points in your sphere. A portion of creativity comes from like having lots of different points of view, learning, developing. It's why some of these very rich people, they get to meet a lot of people like Elon and Steve Jobs, and they're getting very rich, very broad spectrum of interesting data points. So creativity comes a lot from like connecting two disparate data points or two or three, and then some other concept that you may have had. That's the heart and soul creativity. So this is one of my favorite entrepreneurs of all time. I'm really dating myself right now. I asked ChatGPT like how Willy Wonka would describe creativity. And creativity, according to Willy Wonka, is a fantastical fusion of imagination, ingenuity, blended with a dash of whimsy and sprinkle of magic, It's the ability to dream wildly, think outside conventional bounds, and envision extraordinary ideas that can amaze and delight the world. And if you think about some of the greatest innovations, they could be small, a one-person, small-person company to something very large. It really is how to think about creating something really magical outside the box. And for those that haven't seen the movie, go watch it. It'll bring you back to your childhood. He completely reimagined what a chocolate factory would look like. It was just the most stunning thing, with everlasting gobstoppers and this cool program where people were trying to buy all these Wonka bars to get a golden ticket so they could go visit this factory. It was a really epic story. So here we go. So creativity starts, first of all, with your most important asset, which is your time. So as far as I know, there's only going to be one Toby Corey on this planet, and one Doug, and one LeBaron, and one James, and about 100 billion people, humans, have lived before us. God knows how many will be ahead of you. There's only one you. That has a beginning and a middle and an end. I haven't found anybody that's come back from life. There are people I think that had different versions of themselves, but there's only a fixed amount of time that you have. So like your iPhone, if you accidentally lose this or drop this, you get a new one. If you fender bang your car, you can go get that fixed. Or rip your jeans, you can go get new ones, or maybe the ripped jeans look really cool. But it really is an important thing to start of, like, where's your time being invested? And I can tell you right now off the top, a third of it is sleeping. If you're not getting at least a third time sleeping, then you're really unhealthy. And then most of us spend a third of our time working, right? We're very focused on the work and the jobs that we do. And then, like, where's that other third going, right? Where are you spending that time? Are you stuck in the same thoughts, the same emotions, yielding the same actions? Or are you really thinking about where that time goes? And it doesn't mean that to not make mistakes, to not take chances, because you should be. That's part of the learning process. But where is that time and energy going? And my daughter gave me this amazing book that Osho wrote called Fear. And the one I love to take just like one or two takeaways from a book. The one takeaway from that, Osho and people like Ram Dass spent a lot of time with people on their deathbed. And it was a really interesting read in that so many of them, that was such a traumatic and incredibly difficult time as they were reaching the end time of their human journey. And basically all of them had one reoccurring theme, which was like, God, I have so many regrets. I should have did this. I should have did that. Why did I do this? And the key is that you want to live as much of your life out over your skis as you possibly can. And that's different for different people, but find ways to get outside of your comfort zone, right? And I don't like the word regrets, because that means like, I haven't done anything wrong. Like, good Lord, I've done so much wrong. If I could go back, certainly I would change so many things about my life, because it's easy to go back and do that, but it's not. If I were to die in the next minute or so, it'd be an amazing life, an amazing book to read. And I want to continue to subscribe to that philosophy. And like I said, there's different ways to do that. But the first thing I ask you, like, where's your time going? So let's talk about another aspect of both your time, this thing called neuroplasticity. So what neuroplasticity is, it's basically is like, how active is the neural network between your ears? That's a massive component of how creative that you're going to be. So the more neuroplasticity you have, the more creative you can be, the less creative that you're going to be. And your neuroplasticity on average tops out at about 12 or 13 years old. So basically this is the amount of both the combination of the neurons, the synapses, where this electricity occurs. We don't know what it is, like where consciousness is. No one's figured that out yet, where it exists. Is it really in your brain? Is it in some unified field theory? Where is that? But a big component of that is that for those that have either young kids or nieces or nephews, I have a 5.5-year-old grandson, and the things that comes out of his mouth are extraordinary because he doesn't have any boundaries. He asks a ton of great questions. What's this? What's that? How does that work? Absolutely crazy ass ideas. It's because he hasn't like fallen into the world of zombie land. Like, oh, we shouldn't be saying that, because his creativity, his neuroplasticity is so rich at that age. As a matter of fact, a newborn from 0 to 2 years old makes 24 million new connections per minute from 0 to 2 years old. So then what happens as you go through life, that neuroplasticity begins to erode. So let's talk a little bit about that. So all of us have, you could argue whether it's 86 billion or 100 billion of these neurons that exist between your ears. And then each one of those has the opportunity to access 10,000 different connections through a synapse. So basically, it's like, wow, 100 billion to 10,000. That's a really, really big number. And that's that capacity of that amazing neuroplasticity. And so high neuroplasticity has a very high correlation to creativity. You can see here where it starts to top out. Creativity and brain waves are really, really strong combination. But it really starts with this really scientific element around this neuroplasticity that we have. And I met this amazing professor at Stanford, Dr. David Engelman, and he basically did research, accessed a paper at Harvard, did a study. It was going back to the 60s, and like 99% of the study, the first chunk was between 0 and 25 years old. At 25 years old, they lost 25% of their neuroplasticity. This is easy to measure. And then at 50 years old, they basically lost another 25% of the neuroplasticity. So roughly half that neuroplasticity went. And it's easy to see how that happens in daily life if you're not focused on developing it, nurturing it. And this is really one of the most important aspects of creativity is your neuroplasticity. In addition to just how expansive that neural network is, what's also an important factor is like what it's connecting in your brain. So the more regions that are connected and accessed shows an incredibly high correlation to like incredible learning and the ability to be really, really creative. So the second most important part from neuroplasticity is this thing called brainwaves. So all of us have roughly about 5 core basic brainwaves that are happening at any given time. So when we're in deep sleep, we're in delta. You can see what that brainwave pattern looks like. Not a conscious state. Maybe you're dreaming, but you're in deep sleep. You're not conscious. Theta is interesting, which is drowsy, REM sleep, drifting off and on. You may have been on a long day or a long flight and you feel like you're in that state. You can see that what that wave looks like. Let me jump to the beta phase because this is where most of our species spend our time. So beta is a very choppy wavelength, and it's when we are trying to do a lot of things at the same time. I got to do, and I'm guilty of it. I have a web browser up. If I ever show you how many tabs I have in my web browser, you would be freaked out. I've got email up, I have my Slack up, WhatsApp, and I'm always like context switching. And Microsoft did a study, and the number of people who can truly like multitask, do more than one thing at the same time, is actually 2.5% of the entire population. But we're simulating that. And like when you're in that state, there's zero creativity here. I got to go pick up the kids. I'm behind on this paper. And like, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a time. There should be a time for this, but there's zero creativity that can be had. If you stay in this state too long, it's actually very unhealthy because your body starts to then release cortisol, anxiety comes in, stress comes in, and all of that. And that's what happens is that a lot of diseases emanate from here, which basically generates inflammation and then goes on to potentially causing problematic diseases down the road. But it really starts with is how much time is being spent in here. The 2 most interesting brainwaves where creativity can open up and can happen. The first one is an alpha state. So this is when you just have an opportunity to go for a walk. I try every single day to make sure I leave the office and I just go for a walk, where I basically leave my cell phone. I'm not on my laptop. I'm not on my 13,000 browser windows that are set up. And I start working, maybe it's just breathing, being aware of myself, and just getting into a relaxed state, right? There's lots of ways to do that. Meditation for me, I think Doug's a lot better than I am. I have a hard time, my brain does have a hard time settling down. It's not for everybody. For me, breathing is really, really good. It's the simplest thing. I do it in the morning when I get up before I have my coffee. I make sure I have a glass of water. I get a little bit of a ritual. Then I'm gonna have my coffee, probably another 3 or 4 cups during the day. But the alpha state, or maybe could be knitting or crochet or some art project that you do, what have you. And then the more interesting, a lot of creativity can happen here. You could be in the shower. Lots of times you hear people say, oh my God, I was in the shower. I had this like, it's because you basically had an opportunity to like unwind from all the other shit going on in your day. Gamma state's really interesting because this is, so those that aren't familiar, transcendental meditation, it was founded by David Lynch. And basically they claim that doing a learning transcendental meditation, 20 minutes in the morning and 20 minutes at evening will get you in this gamma state where it's literally almost out of body. And the other way I would describe this, for me, I always get in this state when I surf. I don't know what it is. The ocean, I wrote I read this amazing book called The Blue Mind, um, Dr. Jay Nichols, and I was like, why am I so attracted to the ocean and the water? He did a great PhD project on explaining why that is, but it literally changes my brainwaves. It changes my state of mind. When I'm surfing, Doug and I have gone on amazing trips. I literally am in this, I can think so clearly, and everything just feels like I'm part of the universe, and things feel like infinity to me. This is a scam for any athlete out there. Did you ever you couldn't miss one basketball shot, or every time on the soccer field, you were just operating faster than somebody else? Or if you're working on a math problem or a business problem, it just comes to you, right? That's called the flow state. That's when you're going to be in your most creative, and your brain waves actually then start to light up all around in your brain, and you're accessing different regions and these unique data points that you can get. So this state's really important. It comes in very different ways. No two people access it the same way, but being conscious of these, I found for myself to be really, really helpful, and really developing my creativity and not falling into dogma and conformity, which it's like gravity. Like our society loves to basically put us in these boxes and put us in these lanes. And then what that looks like is, you can see here, with just basically kind of eye closed and doing some transcending, is that you end up connecting really rich regions of your brain. Here's another good version of when you're in this gamma state. You can see basically like the additional electrical connections that get made. And then here was actually, I found some on why I think psychedelic research is so important from being a really effective medicine. People that have struggled with PTSD and depression and anxiety and other childhood traumas, and that the studies that I've read from Johns Hopkins is that literally 10 years of therapy is the same as like 2 sessions of psilocybin. And what that happens is that when I go back to this brainwave state, as your neuroplasticity erodes, this is a really expensive organ. It takes a lot of energy. So your body naturally goes, well, I want to basically not have to spend all that energy there. So if I'm not using this expensive neuroplasticity, I'm just going to pare that back. So as you use less and less, and actually what worse happens is that if you find yourself in these ruts, is because what happens is those neural pathways, the brain, like your system says, your DNA says, oh, this is important for him, so I'm going to make these connections faster. So it actually develops mylar around that neural pathway. So it's like a groove, like if you've ever been on like a bike track or a record, and you just basically stay in that, right? And that's why people with addiction suffer so difficult, because they can't get out of that, right? So finding ways to basically, and the same thing, creativity works the same way. What you want to be able to do is get yourself into where you're connecting really rich regions of your brain, different versions of your brain. Again, some of it can be done through meditation. There's lots of different ways. No two people are the same, but this really underlies like a really critical aspect of creativity, which is like, first, like if you want to change any behavior, 3 things have to occur. Number 1, you got to be like, oh, I want to change that behavior. Number 2, like, oh, I'm willing to do something about that. And number 3, like I'm actually willing to put the work in to try and do that, right? And it's the same thing with creativity. Like I want to be a more creative person. And you're going to find your own different ways to do that. And basically, like if you walk out of here and say, oh, Toby said I should do these things, like then you missed the spirit of my talk. Because like my opinion and $3 is like worth a Lulu's coffee down the street. What it's designed to do is hopefully throw some seeds out there, throw some breadcrumbs out there, because it's going to be unique for you. I think all of us have what's your own unique tapestry. So like when I read a book, it's not like, oh, Tim Ferriss said I should do these 5 things. Or Sam Harris said I should do these things. Like, oh, this is interesting. This resonates with me, but I'm going to twist it a little bit this way and really go into my authenticity and my richness of who I am, being an individual person, and letting that lead me, right? So we talked about time, we talked about neuroplasticity, and we talked about brain waves. So I've got a few more slides here. I'll open up for some questions as I traverse through here. So as I said, what happens is, since it's a really expensive organ from an energy standpoint, it basically, as you use it less, it will begin to retract. So that's why at 12 or 13, that tops out. And then you basically fall into like high school. Oh, you start to do a little bit conformity. You go to college, you go to work, and then all of life and society. And then that neuroplasticity just begins to erode over time. It's why we have these deep divisions in politics today. People literally forgot how to like think for themselves, right? So my point is that this capability, you all have it. Everyone on this planet has this, and it manifests itself in incredibly different ways. I like to think I'm a good singer, but I'm really tone deaf. My daughter is great. Like, I could become probably better at what I do. I'll never reach probably her or Doug's guitar playing ability. But so I find stuff, but I experiment. I try things. Am I good at this? Do I like doing this? Do I want to develop it further? Do I not? I typically find, like, every month a single project that I want to do to explore myself, right? This month I've been learning how to write Japanese haikus, right? So I'll find the craziest shit, expanding my mind. It may lead to other things that I never, like unintended consequences that begin to occur. So another good example, like when I first started, I took my first programming course my junior year of college. It was too late for me to major in it, so I ended up getting a minor in computer science. I'm like, I want to be a computer programmer. And I love technology. I didn't know how it was going to change the world, but I knew it was. So I got out of college. I started as a software test engineer, and then I became a junior software engineer, and I found myself like mediocre. And I knew I could get better at it, but we were hiring people from MIT. My math's good. It's not MIT good. And it's really frustrating to be average or mediocre. And I'm like, so not only did like it, I didn't want to develop that because I felt like there was, some type of ceiling with that. So I've always been really good at finding mentors in my life. I have them today. That's another whole subject matter I could do, is how to do that, how to find great mentors. But I'm sure you've all had them in your life that you could point to. Going back on my earliest childhood memories would be Mrs. Finnegan in 7th grade. I remember I was going to this Catholic school, was probably hanging out with the wrong crew. She pulled me aside and gave me this book called How to Be a Nonconformist. And that just stuck with me from today on, right? So I've had these great mentors in my life. And I think that, so when I went, I had a mentor at this company I worked for. I said, I'm really frustrated. I think I can be an okay programmer, not great. And I go, what's your advice? And he was amazing. He said, what do you want to do with your life, Toby? I said, I want to run my own company someday. He said, great, go into product management. It's kind of like a mini CEO. You got to basically define the unmet need in the marketplace. You got to write a requirements document. You got to work with engineers and product people to actually figure out how to develop a product and take that to market. And it was like the best advice that he ever gave me, right? And it set me on an entirely different path. But my superpower wasn't being a software engineer. So this is open for debate. This works for me. Some of it, all of it may work for you. So this is a framework. I call this my Zentrepreneur framework of what I focus on and like how to use my time. Because as I said, the most important function of creativity, right? How many unique data points are you getting in your sphere of consciousness? So for me, it all starts on this consciousness dimension, right? And that's like a really powerful concept of consciousness. And it's your memories, it's your feelings, and some of us, it's our true self. And it's the most unknown, basically, mystery of our species, of what is consciousness. I know when I get my breathing down and I get out of that beta state, I can connect with that. I had the most amazing psychedelic journey 3 years ago. That's another talk. It was like so completely out of body. My soul, my consciousness was just there. But like, we're all able to access. I know all of you have or have done that. Your deepest memories. Like if I asked you to close your eyes and go back in time and think about your room, some of your earliest childhood memories. Like, do you have a carpet? Was it hardwood floor? Did you have a bed in there, a desk, a dresser? I'll bet that's a clear vision in your mind. Like no one knows where that is or how you were accessing that or where that memory was stored. That's all in consciousness. But that's a big part of creativity, is being able to expand along this. Sometimes it's reading, right? Rereading Ram Dass's book or what have you, where it's breathing, it's surfing, it's yoga, it's everything here where I'm investing my time. That's the other important aspect of creativity, right? To really develop along this dimension, expand along this dimension. I haven't gone to one in a while, but they used to have sound baths here with Danny Goldberg. I would get incredibly mystic in that. So finding those things that would enrich my consciousness, that's where creativity is. That's how your neuroplasticity is going to expand. This axis here, I call it wisdom. What's wisdom? Well, you could call it wisdom and knowledge are kind of interchangeable terms. But for me, basically, it's like raw information that I can turn into some kind of knowledge or information, right? Knowledge or wisdom, right? So in this case here, how do you build that? Well, I would ask you all, are you reading any books? Are you reading any blogs? Are you listening to any podcasts? What TV shows do you watch? what types of people do you meet, right? Because that's where you're going to, the different acculturations and different points of view. So I'll give you a couple examples. The two subjects that I hated wildly in school were philosophy and science. And I love them now. So I spend so much time in more modern day philosophers, people like Terence McKenna. His podcasts just blow me away. And he brings us an entirely different perspective of like the second law of thermodynamics and entropy and how the brain's connected to that. And his theory on like how our species basically came to be who we are with natural selection and some apes eating some magic mushrooms. Like, it's just like the most fucking astounding, far out stuff that gets me thinking in a broader, deeper way that I never even thought of that, right? Again, it's just a unique data point. Ram Dass, Richard Dawkins, and a number of other people that that just are, I think, are modern day philosophers, right? And on the science side, that was probably my most hated subject. I've been absolutely fascinated with this emerging physics called quantum mechanics. So basically, it's all about what happens at the subatomic level, right? So we have like relativity and gravity, and all those great things that Newton and Einstein developed, which are all make sense in a world full of matter and structure. But then when you get beyond that, like all of us are basically, we have about 120 different chemicals or elements that exist in the world. We're all made of those parts of those elements. Those elements are comprised of molecules. Then those molecules are comprised of things called atoms. These atoms have a nucleus, they have an electron. That nucleus can be broken down into quarks, an up quark and a down quark. And you've got this whole concept of where basically things can be either particle or wave. And where like infinite probabilities exist in that, right? All that going into like, where did the universe come from? Like, where's all of this? Where do we come from? So a whole different theory, but like I spend so much time really learning about quantum mechanics. People like Brian Greene, he still lectures at Columbia. David Tong, and then John Hagelin, who is now the president of the Transcendental Meditation, does amazing. He wrote a paper in the mid-70s called Unified Field Theory, where he basically surmised that all consciousness basically is what the world is what everything is consciousness, that we are of that in essence, and that it existed in this unified field theory. But aside from like how technical the science is and the math behind it, the concepts are just mind-blowing to me. So I spend a lot of time, the books that I read, the people I try to reach out to and meet, instead of like, oh, I don't have time for that. This is a good example here where like, I'll always make time for this. One, those that know me know I like to hear myself talk, but two, like, especially meeting with students, like that's one of the things that I really, really enjoy. So I'm super excited to get back to teaching at UCSC. So as you're expanding, so you're contracting or expanding or staying static within these dimensions. You can create your own framework, but I think you get the concepts of it. This is really important here. So this is called your work product or your action, right? So the two things I can tell you to work at Tesla are the most valued skills there. Number one, you better be the most creative person on the planet. Like if you're in a meeting with Elon and you come to him with a really pedestrian idea, that meeting is going to go bad really, really quickly. He's looking for people that are thinking outside the box, that are really creative, that are amazing problem solvers, because that's where value gets created. Value is created by doing hard things. Accomplishments in life, whether it's a nonprofit or whatever, are accomplished by figuring out really hard things, solving really, really hard problems, whether it's a go-to-market strategy, how to get momentum behind this idea. So that work product becomes really important. And the first version of it is always going to suck. So I used to hate to do outlines. I would never do them. And now, like, I don't send anything. If I'm working on something, it's gone through several iterations before I even but the old Toby would just whip something together, throw it out there. Now I take the time and energy to try and refine it. I just sent LeBaron a description of this program I'm working on. And I think she's seeing like version 6 or 7 on it, right? Normally I would just send her some really rough thoughts. She said, this sucks, like start all over. But it really is all about, it's almost similar to sculpting. When you start sculpting, there's a few lines and a few cutouts, like what is that? And then over time, it becomes something probably pretty beautiful. Or creating a new music composition. It starts out with maybe a bass line, maybe there's a bridge, I don't know, some elements of it. It's kind of all janky. And then all of a sudden it emerges into something really beautiful, right? It's art. So the point being is that I tell all my students that this is your brand. Like what you put your name on, whether it's a poem or a presentation, I look at like Santa Cruz Works as a good example. Like the newsletters they send out like are really well written. You can just tell like a lot of like incredible energy went into that and passion. And there's a term for that. Basically, it's called like cleaners. And have you ever been to a restaurant where the waiter or waitress made you feel so good, right? And just like an amazing experience. That can happen anywhere. Maybe a boss that you had in work, or a restaurant that you went to, or what have you, is like having that passion for like, if I'm going to do something, do it to the best of your ability, or just don't do it at all. Because life's too short to half-ass something. So that was the second thing here, whether it's Tesla. So basically, like, you better be super creative and your work product better be off the chart. Oh, you better work 90 hours a week. But more importantly, like, this is the currency of the 21st century. That's what businesses are going to value. I'll give you two more examples. When I first started at this company, at Coleco, I was a software engineer. They shut down the electronics group. I was young. I was like 23 or 24. Like, this kid maybe have some potential. So they moved me into this project manager role. And Coleco just released this brand new product called Cabbage Patch Dolls. It was like a wild success. It was these funky looking dolls, but what made them cool was everyone thought they were unique, and it came with its own birth certificate, kind of like the Wonka bar. And basically, you got to basically name your Cabbage Patch Kid, you send it in, we send you an official birth certificate, and we couldn't make enough of these. So I was basically learning how to do project management and production schedules. And I went to our first toy show, because at the time, toys were bought these things called retail stores. And there was two shows. One in February was in New York, the toy show, and one in the fall in Atlanta. And so I went to the one in New York. A bunch of retailers placed orders. And then as we got through the spring season, 7% of the products that our customers had ordered, we couldn't fulfill because we couldn't make them. So I'm like, oh, like, no one told me like that was a problem. It's like tens of millions of dollars lost there. I'm like, I'll better be valuable to this company if somebody figured out how to solve this problem. So I wrote a little database application. So I had access to every fabric we've ever used in a Cabbage Patch doll, how a polka dot treatment, or all the treatments to it, the injection molding, how long that would take for some of their little accessories, or rotomolding of the head, and how long it would take to source all these materials or these items. And I went to the R&D team and I said, hey, you guys, when you design products, you like customers and kids to buy them, right? They're like, yeah. I do realize like 7% of all of our stuff doesn't see the light of day. They're like, no. So I'm like, hey, here's my database application. What do you think? So as you're designing products, I'll tell you the window we're going to try and ship it. And if you can't source something in that time, you may want to think twice. And it actually worked. I'll give you a smaller version of the story. So when you get solar, basically, is it's challenging because it's complex. Does it really work? Does it really save me money? And then the process to get it is really rough, because you can't get a solar system unless you submit a CAD drawing into the planning department here. It's called an AHJ, Authority Having Jurisdiction. They look at the plan and go, okay, we'll give you a permit to put that solar on. So the way solar's sold, basically, and Elon's always about like the most minimal customer experience. Like, he's maniacal about that. And so part of the process is, if you were going to get a solar system, you probably talk to a salesperson. That person would have a tool. They could basically like draw a solar system on your roof. They could figure stuff out, like, so what's going to get the most sunlight, the pitch of your roof, shading, and all of that, and say, hey, I can get you this like 10 kilowatt system. It'll produce this amount of electricity per year at this cost. How does that sound? And you might be, oh, this sounds really great. So then you sign a contract. There's a stipulation in there, though, that it's got to actually produce the results that you said it would. So then at that point, we would send what's called a site. So more intrusion to the customer. I got to send someone to your house. They have to get on your roof. They have to anchor in there. A lot of customers don't like someone punching holes in their roof. To do these readings, so they can read like the pitch, the azimuth, like how much shading is going to impact the system. And then they got to go in your attic and make sure that your rafters are to code, because if they're not, then they can't fix the system in, because it has to be inspected once it's installed. So basically, Elon's like, get rid of that step. So I'm like, okay, I can get a drone to do all the outside stuff. Like, and I'm thinking out loud, I'm like, I'm not sure how I'm going to like deal with the attic. And basically, because you can't send a customer up there, that's a liability. If they fall when they're getting out there and you sent them up there, then you're liable for that. So he just looked at me and he goes, Toby, if I can fucking design a rocket and I can launch, and this is exact words, and I can launch that rocket and I can land that rocket, you can fucking figure out how to not do a site survey, right? And it was like, all customers were doing, all companies were doing it that way. So I could have boiled the ocean. So I spent some time, I like decompressed. So I didn't get fired in that meeting. That was kind of cool, and kind of went through my exercise. And I was just really trying to think in a more loose, like, how am I going to solve this problem, right? Because no one had ever brought that problem up to me. So it just came to me like, you know what? Let me see how many homes get disqualified because of an inadequate roof structure. And I went and looked, and it was like 1.4%. So we're sending all this money and costs and a shitty customer experience. And when 98.6% of our customers didn't need someone to come and intrude on their home, right? So a small version of that, but like that's where that's where you start to unlock value, and really be to challenge yourself in the right types of ways, really around those types of concepts. So kind of last slide, kind of gone probably longer than I wanted to, but I always do that. Creativity is a function of time, your neuroplasticity, brain waves. And I wanted to read one final thought, which was this term qualia. I loved it when I found it. I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up, to be honest with everybody. So qualia, some of you may know it, I'm sure LeBaron does, are the subjective consciousness experiences or qualities of our sensory perceptions. They refer to raw, qualitative aspects of what it's like to have a particular mental or sensory experience. Qualia are often described as the what it feels like or what it's like aspect of our mental states. Here are some examples. The redness of a ripe tomato, the taste of a lemon, the pain of a headache, the smell of a rose. Qualia are all often used in physiological discussions to highlight the subjective and private nature of consciousness experiences. They raise questions about nature of consciousness, subjectivity, and the hard problem of consciousness proposed by philosopher David Chalmers. The hard problem of consciousness asks why and how physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective qualitative experiences like color, taste, and pain. Qualia is a topic of ongoing philosophical debate, have implications to our understanding of the mind, consciousness, relationship between physical brain and our conscious experiences, and creativity. So I think that is ending, again, like my ethos. I want to try to contribute to actually creating more opportunities versus more problems. And, sort of my summary would be most people follow someone else's path. And if you want to be happy and successful in life, I would say accept who you are. Make that basically define your own path, right? And in my mind, I always have goals, but it's funny when you reach them, it's kind of like, oh yeah, that was all right. But like spend time in the richness of the journey. That's where the real value is and opportunity and growth and development, right? And this whole concept that I talked about, which is like explore your edges. Osho talks about that, getting out over your skis as much as you can. When I went full time at Cruise Foam 2.5 years ago, it was similar when I went to Solar City. When I went to Solar City, I talked to Elon. I go, I know nothing about solar, like zero. I don't even know how it works. And if you show me my electricity bill, it would be like, what's a demand charge? Like, what's a kilowatt hour? That was like all Greek to me. And he's like, I don't want someone from solar because they're already pre-programmed on how to run a bit. That's not what I want. I want out of the box thinking. I want creativity. So you're going to come in a very naive way, but you've been a successful entrepreneur. I think you're a good problem solver. That's what I value, right? And I think like that's that opportunity. Same thing when I went to Cruise Foam. Like this is a very technical product, right? Our two co-founders are chemistry major, John Feltz, and material science master's degree. Marco Orlando, our chief science officer, has his PhD in Stanford in physics and material science, right? But it was, again, that naivete of like bringing a unique perspective, because we don't want to run ourselves like a polystyrene company. Like that's not the goal here. It's like, how do we transform the world, right? Like Elon never worked for NASA and he built an amazing rocket company. Elon never worked for Ford and he's built the most successful automotive company, right? So I think these things have all, served me really well. And I'll just end on lots of times when life gets nutty and it's the first thing is like, oh my God, I'm going nutty. I got to slow down a little bit. And so there's this awareness part, right? I think all of us take a little bit of time. It could be like 10 seconds during the day. And then I've always found all of challenges in life, no matter what's going on in your mind, and all of us have, I'm sure in this room have gone through really difficult times or are going through difficult times right now, or you're going to go through difficult times tomorrow, is that just consumes you, is to find that time. There's always a flow. Like you can continue to swim against the stream all you want. You're not going to get too far. You can try and like push a massive rock up a hill and it's going to, at some point it's going to fall down on you. because you're going against the grain, you're going against the flow. So it could be the simplest thing. Lots of times, like I want to think like Sundays is a great day. A lot of times, like I will just come down here by myself, like this downtown area. I think back of the 60s or 70s and just like, and it just like, it just nourishes me, right? And it feels good. It feels like flow. And all of us, I think, have those moments in time. You probably spend a little more time like finding new ones or connecting more frequently with those flows that you have. So anyway, that's my talk. Take it or leave it. Hopefully it was worth your time. So. I got time for a couple quick questions, and I got to skate out of here. So again, hopefully just let it sink in. Like I said, don't walk out of here and like, oh, I need to do this entrepreneur graph or what have you. All it was really designed to do is like when I've had good classes or talked to someone who read a good book, if it makes me think, then it was successful. And that's as I said, I made a case for why I think creativity is so critical, why you all have it. But overall here, all my intention was to do is like come out of a little bit different perspective, see where it leads you.